Welcome everybody. My name is Wilma Hodges. I'm Director of Training and E-Learning Initiatives at Longsight, and I'll be moderating today's webinar. Today's session is the future of Sakai, and we're fortunate enough to have Dr. Charles Severance, or Dr. Chuck as he's commonly known, here with us today to share his vision of where Sakai is headed and what we can expect to see in current and upcoming releases. So before we get going, I'm just going to go over a few housekeeping items. We are recording the presentation. I'll be sending out the link to the recording after the event, or you can go to our YouTube channel to see any of our previous sessions that have also been recorded. During the session, please post your questions in the question text box. We're going to save questions to the end just to make sure that we get through the presentation. So there will be plenty of time for questions during the Q&A portion. But go ahead and type them in as they occur to you so that we can kind of start putting those into the question queue. If we don't get to your question, or if you have any follow-up questions, or if you'd like to volunteer to be a presenter for a future session, please feel free to contact me directly, wilma@longsight.com. So I have a quick poll I'm going to push out to everybody really quick just to get an idea of who we have in our audience today. So give me just 1 second to launch this. Okay, so if you could take just a moment to let us know what your primary role is at your institution. I'll give people just a couple minutes to select their role. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and close the poll now. And let me share out the results for everyone. All right, so it looks like we've got a lot of information technology folks and a lot of instructional design support. That's kind of the bulk of our audience. We have, about 11% administrators, 5% faculty, and 2% other. So we've got a decent spread of folks. So I'm sure once we get to some of the more technical slides, your information technology and instructional design, you guys will have lots of questions, I'm sure. So please be sure to get those in as we go. So let me go ahead and hide the poll. Go back to my screen. Okay. So now I'd like to introduce Dr. Charles Severance. Charles is a clinical associate professor in the School of Information at the University of Michigan. He works with the IMS Global Learning Consortium, promoting and developing standards for teaching and learning technology. He also works for Longsight as Sakai Chief Strategist. Previously, he was the executive director of the Sakai Foundation and the chief architect of the Sakai Project. So, without further ado, let me go ahead and turn the presenter controls over to Chuck. And then he can take it away.
Thank you, Wilma. Are you seeing my slides?
Yes.
Super. Okay. So thanks everybody for being here. I think this is a lot of fun to talk about, and I'm going to try to make sure that I move quickly through the slide part so we can have plenty of time at the end for questions, because I assume that the questions are going to be the most interesting part. So I'm really not speaking officially on behalf of the University of Michigan or Longsight or IMS Global. I'm not speaking on behalf of the U.S. government either. These are just the folks that pay me money, and so I have to make it clear that I'm not speaking on behalf of them. I want to start out and talk a bit about, if we were a company, what would be our strengths in the marketplace, right? And these are sort of important points. I think the thing that we set Sakai up from the very beginning was to keep the distance between end users and people who could change the software as short as possible. I'm going to hope that every IT person and every instructional designer at least personally knows someone, say like Sam or me or Aaron or Nicola, that have commit, literally have commit. And there's no other situation where you personally know someone so that you can say, hey, just fix that one thing. And just through personal contact. And that's part of the reason that our software responds so rapidly to the needs of teachers and learners. I think another thing, especially for smaller and medium-sized schools, is if you really want one piece of software that's going to be a great learning management system, but also a great system for other kinds of sharing and collaboration, and you don't want like 12 different pieces of software, Sakai is the only tool that can solve the broadest range of collaboration in teaching and learning. Open source keeps our seat cost very low. And so we have comparable functionality to the commercial providers in the marketplace. Moodle, of course, also has low seat cost. Open source is a part of the driver of that. I would say that our commercial providers ecosystem is the healthiest of any open source community that I've ever seen. And literally, other projects either have like one provider, or they have sort of this carefully constructed partners program that keeps people out of the marketplace. And we also have the most hosting flexibility, right? You can run it yourself, you can outsource it, you can put it in the cloud, you can switch your hosting. People have switched their hosting overnight. Just like, yeah, I think I'm tired of self-hosting. I'll back my database up and I'll outsource that. And I also think that open source, and we heard this at the Apereo conference at the keynote, that open source is a great leveler when it comes to geographic advantage or disadvantage. There is less geographic disadvantage. And most of our competitors are US or US and Europe based, but Sakai and Moodle, by their very nature, meet the needs of people around the world and give enterprise quality software to people around the world. I think we should be very mindful of that and very proud of that. But it's only fair if I talk about Sakai's strengths to also talk about Sakai's weaknesses. That's part of being open. Sakai 2.8 was ugly, 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 ugly. And it was missing critical functionality. And frankly, up to and including Sakai 2.8, we were missing critical functionality. And it amazes me that we were as successful as we are with everything up to before Sakai 2.9. And Sakai 2.9 really was, I think, our prettiest release. Maybe that's because I built the portal for that. Maybe that's just because it's my baby, and so I always think my own baby is very pretty. But I think it's the prettiest LMS in the marketplace. And we really had complete functionality. And so I think our place in the marketplace a year ago with Sakai 2.9 was, it was hard. We were really strong relative to everybody else. And now here we are in 2.14, and we're releasing Sakai 10, and I'm starting to hear that we're not the market leader in user delight, and I kind of understand that. And so these weaknesses are the weaknesses that should just make us angry. If that's our weakness, yeah, that may be our weakness, and so we should fight to fix that. And last week was the Canvas Instructure, and some of you may have seen Michael Feldstein's blog post about the Instructure Canvas. And they showed some really cool growth numbers. If you look, the blue part is higher education, the red part is K-12, and the other part is pilots and corporations. Sakai, our rough market numbers are about 300 schools in mostly higher education. So that line across is sort of us. So Instructure finally has more higher education clients than we do. But if you look at the size, our market share, especially if you look at this graph, a year ago our market share was larger than Instructure when you measure it by the number of schools. Now, of course, we're going to lose a couple of schools, and so this number will change, and Instructure is going to grow. But the key thing is we're a real and significant part of the marketplace. And what's most amazing about that is if you look at every other single part except for Moodle and Sakai, are the only ones that don't have a bunch of venture capital invested in those products, and as a result, driving those products in certain directions, whereas we are driven by the people on this call. We are not driven by venture capitalists, we're not driven by shareholders, and we're not driven by profitability. The thing we care about is the people who make our software. And none of these people who make our software are paid by Sakai, as it were. We have Neil, who's our coordinator, but the developers and the development of Sakai is all done by people who freely associate with us. And so we've been doing this a lot longer than them in structure. And you can see that our number of contributors has hovered somewhere between 20 and 40. That's really contributors per month, not contributors per year, and that's why it kind of hops up and down. Some people skip months. But basically you can see that we have been stable, and we haven't really changed all that much in the last couple of years. And if you look at the number of commits per month, and this is not so much as about how many people, but how much the code is changing. So we're making lots of changes, and again, you can see in the beginning part in 2006, we had a lot of stuff that was happening, especially right around the release dates, and you see a stabilization of that. And in this next graph, I kind of show how our code sort of grew from nothing, and we're about 1.5 million lines. But you also see, like, we're just growing very, very slowly, and that's because we now have a mature product. If you go back to 2004 through 2009, the slope of that line is much greater, and so that's when we needed tons and tons of people to move this product forward. And really, if you go all the way up to 2.9, 2.9 was what I think of as our functionality complete release. So we grew to that point. And so I expect it will be flat or even going down a little bit as we go forward into the future releases of Sakai. And so that's all, I think, really healthy indications of our community, of the vibrancy of our community. But in that same 10-year period, our community has changed dramatically in terms of the makeup. So if you go back to 2004, 2005, 2006, we were led heavily by universities like Indiana, Cambridge, Stanford, Michigan, pulling a lot of weight, right? And this was, if you go back and you were on the list in 2005, you'd ask a question, and that question would be answered by someone from the University of Michigan. Mostly because the people at the University of Michigan knew more about the software because they had more experience. And then folks like Cambridge, for example, came on strong, and you see the Cambridge line go zooming up. But then all of a sudden you see in the 2008-2009 period, you see a drop-off of the contributions of the universities, and then you see an increase of contributions from independent contributors. The gmail.com, which is just people using their own personal address rather than a university address, and then companies like Longsight and Unicon start moving up. And if you look at us in 2013, and I just don't show the data until a year is complete. If you look at the data, the only really significant participant at this point in the developer communication is University of Michigan. Other than generic individual contributors, we have Longsight as the largest single company communicating on the dev list, followed then by Unicon. And that's pretty much in the form of people like Matt and Nicola and Sam and then Aaron and others. But you see this thing where we have transitioned from a university-heavy development community to a commercially, not heavy, but about 50% of our energy comes from our commercial providers. And that's really, really an important transition that we've made. And it also means that those who are customers of the commercial affiliates, SahiNet, Unicon, and Longsight, are really supporting the forward progress of the project at this point, because all of those companies have seen fit to send us some of their best and their brightest and share the talent of those folks. And I myself am sponsored and supported by my travel, and everything that I do are sponsored and supported by Longsight, and so that allows me to continue. So, I mean, in summary, we are really a reflection of higher education. We are not trying to be the best K-12 learning management system. We're not trying to be the best corporate learning management system. We are trying to be the absolute best higher education learning management system. So let's briefly talk about Sakai 10. So Sakai 10 builds on Sakai 2.9, which I love the Sakai 2.9 release. I was very proud of it. And there's a lot of user-facing improvements, things like peer review, getting rid of the Java applet, calculated question types, improved administrator, the thanks Wilma for the completely rebuilt help that we've got, and the ability to internationalize that, et cetera, et cetera. I hope we someday turn that into a book. So you see a lot of user-facing improvements in Sakai 10. And if you look at these improvements, you'll see that really many of the people on this call were the source of those improvements, and many of those improvements came through commercial providers like Longsight, right? So NYU would ask Longsight to do X, and then it makes it be part of the product, and that becomes kind of the virtuous cycle that moves our product forward. But it really is moving forward based on the itches that our customers have, which is exactly how it should. There's a whole lot, and I'll talk about this in the Sakai 11 bit, there's a whole lot of amazing stuff that ended up going in under the covers that you'll never really notice. And that is really making Sakai cloud ready, where these are performance enhancing things which basically make it so that Sakai can support more users with less resources. Session failover, improving the REST API, a single shared cache which reduces the overall memory footprint and speeds the startup of a new cluster. And so this kind of leads us to a very cloud-ready piece of software. And you won't notice this when you use the software. You'll notice that first list of things that I showed you. You'll notice that your system administrators at universities who self-host may not notice this hardly at all, because they already have some hardware and they've bought, 6 servers or whatever, and they've got the 6 servers, and 90% of the time they really could get away with 2 servers, and they got 6 in case of final exams. But the commercial folks want to be more dynamic, right? They want to be able to spin up a new one, take down a new one, all kinds of things, more suitable for a virtualized environment. Say if you're on Amazon, you want to be able to only use the resources you really need at the time. So that's really what it means to be in the cloud, and that is you can't be as wasteful of resources when you're in the cloud as you are in a self-hosted environment where you pay for the stuff once and you amortize the whole thing over 3 years, and you really don't care. But as schools also move to virtualized environments, then schools can take advantage of these kinds of things that we now have in Sakai as they kind of evolve towards more virtualized environments. About a year ago, June 2013, I gave this sort of vague talk where I talked about what might happen in the next 2 years of Sakai. And frankly, I had no idea what we were going to end up with in Sakai 10 at the time. So I was just like plucking crazy things out of the air, like sticky sessions. Now, I was saying that we might attack sticky sessions 2 years from 2013, which would be 2015, but it's already in 10. And then if you look at my next slide from that same talk in 2013, scale, spinning up instances easy upgrades, able to upgrade a cluster continuous, and enabling software as a service. And so we're starting to see some of the things that last year this time I thought were 2-year solutions were actually solved in 1 year, right? And meaning they're in the release that's hopefully coming out this week. So in some ways it's really, really impressive. And so moving from like my surprise at how much further we got in Sakai 10 than I would have even guessed, because I was just guessing last year. Let's talk a little bit about Sakai 11. So Sakai 11 is, it's a whole different way of thinking for us, because we as a community over the past decade, and you can read my book to find out why it was that we just don't like roadmaps, or have historically not liked roadmaps. I could give you 2 hours of why this was a bad idea, but it isn't a bad idea anymore. And the reason we had problems with roadmaps before is we'd write something down without knowing how resources were going to show up, or we would have layers of governance, like a board or a product council or something, and then what they would think is like they would just yell at you and say, you wrote this down, how come you're not done? So there's the workers, and then there are people who decided they were just decision makers. And so we had these layers that mess things up. Well, over the past 3 years, with some effort, we have really cleaned up the governance of Sakai. We know who's in charge, and the increase in contribution of commercial providers means that they can actually predict resources more clear. They go like, okay, what can we do in the next year with half of this person and a quarter of that person and whatever, which is not the same as what universities can do. And universities have started to pay commercial providers to do work. So universities will go like, I got $30,000. That means that kind of thing could happen in the next year. So we are starting to have a roadmap exercise. And we have a meeting now in late January usually, and it's usually in Phoenix, and we call it the Unconference. It's not just for Sakai, but for all of Apereo. And I wanted to show you a picture of one of the meetings, but I didn't have any pictures of the meetings, but I did have a picture of the bar. So those are let's see, there's Aaron and Sam and I don't know, there's Matt and John Bush. And so those are all the competitors. I think that's Anthony there. Those are all competitors sitting around having a drink, trying to figure out where this product is going to go. And at that meeting, and by the way, everybody is welcome to come to this unconference. At that meeting, we sat in a room with mostly the technical leadership, but literally everybody in the place who wanted to talk about this, and we wrote down a combination of what we thought we could do. Sakai 11 Strawman is what we called it, to keep it from being too hardcore. But what we thought we could do, and you see NYU are saying things, and me saying things, and Longsight saying things, what we thought were going to happen in that. And you can go see this thing on Confluence. Now, a lot of companies have really slick roadmaps. This is not a very slick roadmap, but it's a very tasty roadmap. So these were the things that we thought we would do. Now, this is one of the things that you can't do with a company's roadmap. Because our roadmap is in a wiki, you can do a difference between February and June and say who changed the roadmap and why did they change the roadmap. So you see things that have been added, you see things that have been removed. As ideas grow or as resources go away, we changed it. The other thing that we found from January to June of this year was that some of the things we thought were 18 months away actually got done. So like this little deletion of the Access SOAP web services, those became in 10. We put them on the roadmap for 11, but people just started coding them up, and they thought, I got to do this in 10. So we had to take a bunch of stuff off our roadmap for 11 because it was done in 10, which is really cool. So there's a lot of things in the Strawman. If you look at that Strawman in detail, you will see that it's very user-facing. And it's broad user-facing, cross-cutting things like a dashboard, frameless portal, responsive design, the Morpheus stuff from NYU that you hopefully heard about or will hear about. You know, question types. There's a wonderful thing that the Teaching and Learning Group led by Josh is working on, the Lessons Builder user interface refinement. A better administrator user interface for some of that cloud features, like Snap integration for discussions. If you look down that, it's really unprecedented how much the focus of the next 12 months of effort on Sakai is going to be on surprise and delight. And that goes back to the weakness that I already said, right? That's the stuff that makes us angry now. People claim that we're not slick and pretty and fancy and responsive. Actually, no one else is responsive either, so who knows? Maybe we'll be the first responsive in the marketplace. So we've got some under-the-cover things. Our leadership, we've always had amazing leadership and standards like LTI2 and this new caliper stuff. And we even write down stretch goals. And the whole idea of our road mapping is to be honest. When we put it down as a stretch goal, that means it's probably got less than 50% chance of success, but at least we can coordinate. And if somebody really wants to say, you know what, that stretch goal, like our wiki replacement, probably will get pulled from stretch goal into real. I don't exactly know how we'll find resources for it, but that idea is starting to percolate. So you put ideas in stretch goals, they percolate through the community, $10,000 frees up somewhere, and somebody gets paid to build something, and bam, like in 11, we'll have it. So this is the beauty where people vote with their energy, they vote with their money, they vote with whatever, and these strawmen become our products based on you, the people listening on this phone, change these goals into reality over the next 12 to 18 months. So that's Sakai 11. Now I want to talk a little bit about like beyond Sakai 11. So I will go back to our friends from Salt Lake City. And the first thing that I'm going to say is that Canvas is not the enemy. Canvas is not the enemy of the Sakai community. It's sort of like saying if United States plays Mexico in the World Cup, is Mexico the enemy? And the answer is no. Mexico's never the enemy. We might win or lose the World Cup, and you might be grumpy about that. So Longsight or Asahi can compete with Canvas and maybe win and maybe lose, but at the end of the day, we should slap each other on the back and go have a beer together and say, how can we change the marketplace in a positive direction? Now, another thing I want to point out about this graph is if you look at the right-hand side, the really significant growth is in K-12. Now, it turns out we've seen this graph. There have been many Canvases in the past. We've seen this graph over and over again. This is the picture of WebCT. This is the picture of Angel. This is the picture of Moodle Rooms. What happens in all these companies? What they do is they establish a base in higher education, they get a nice continuous revenue stream, and they say, we are going to go tackle the mountain that is K-12, the untackleable unsuccess mountain. Selling into K-12, they have a lot less money, they are harder to sell, and they're harder to make happy. And so frankly, if Canvas wants to go after K-12, more power to them. As a matter of fact, I'm totally rooting for Canvas because, and if you've listened to me for 11 years now, you've never heard me say a negative thing about a learning management system. And this is the first moment that I'm going to say something mean about a learning management system. There's one LMS product in the marketplace that really ticks me off. Edmodo. I want to see Canvas crush Edmodo. So I am rooting for Canvas to crush Edmodo. What does Edmodo tick me off? Well, they don't do learning tools interoperability. That's what ticks me off. And they're making their own little closed world, bundled world, a closed world that's all Edmodo all the time. They got 35 million people, and they're trying to suck them in and keep them in, and it isn't free anymore. So Canvas, you go get Edmodo. You do that right now. And so we'll see. We'll see how higher ed works, but Canvas is not our enemy. Our problem, if you go all the way back to 2003, we put it in the grant to the Mellon Foundation that we all signed up for, and that was to reduce the friction to innovation. We are about innovating. We are not about market share. We are about innovating. We are about showing the way. And just because Canvas took all of our good ideas and wrote a Ruby on Rails version of us, we should be happy about that because we showed the way, because it is our purpose to show the way. And so we have had a decade of like changing the world. And Canvas is so young, they weren't even born before we started fixing all the problems in this marketplace. And they're born, they're like, well, of course. And the answer, well, we fixed it. You're using it, and that's great. I don't bother. I'm glad that Canvas uses LTI, uses Common Cartridge. It's awesome. But we have been the driving force in these standards. They all started as part of Sakai, IMS Learning Tools Interoperability, created by Sakai. Brad Wheeler was instrumental in causing that group to be formed. IMS Common Cartridge, the first meeting of an IMS Common Cartridge was with the Sakai board and a series of publishers. So we have, without a doubt, single-handedly caused the market to be better and safer. Now, once we've shown the way, we've got to get people to join. So this is not our way of like excluding. We have to realize that once we show leadership, others will join. And that's part of being a leader, right? It's part of being a leader when your ideas become someone else's ideas and they make more money with your ideas than you do. Welcome to being a leader. That just is part of leadership. So we got this really cool thing, right? We can run Sakai, and we've got all these things to plug in, Course Smart, Wiley Plus, Verisight, Big Blue Button, Vital Source, Piazza. Isn't this great? The answer is, well, it's really great, and it's a lot better than it was in 2004, but it's not perfect yet. The problem is everybody, including the most recent entrant in the market, and that is Canvas, bundles up everything in the LMS. The dominant strategy is put as much in the LMS as possible, beat people with RFPs. That's what's going on. Canvas has done a really good job of putting a lot of sexy looking stuff into one piece of software. And then they build another piece of software, but they connect it to their first piece of software. Everybody did this, right? And then what you do is you think you'll fight to gain market share, and I'm sure that's what they're thinking right now in Salt Lake City, is that soon we will have 100% market share, and then there'll be some utopian world. They'll get to the tipping point, and then they'll use all their money to start eliminating competitors. That is the business plan for everybody in this marketplace, except for us, of course. But this also means that once that market reaches the tipping point, every 3 to 4 years, some new well-funded invading army shows up like Attila the Hun from the north. And the sad result of this is that teachers, students, and IT staff are effectively prisoners of war. You know, the red team beats the black team, and now you are in the prisons of the red team for the next 5 years. Okay? And frankly, that's why I switched from being Sakai first to being IMS first in 2008 personally, because I felt like no matter what I did, even if our product was open source, that still left me a prisoner of war of Sakai. Right? I wanted to escape Sakai. Open source was not. Open source makes things cheap and it's wonderful, but it doesn't necessarily create freedom for teachers and learners. Right? Freedom for teachers and learners comes from unbundling the learning management system. You need to create standards. You need to make cooperating vendors. We can't fight with Canvas, at least when it comes to interoperability. We can fight with them on terms of look and feel and our gradebook and their gradebook and our lessons and their lessons and modules. Fine. That's fine. We can try to make each other's product better. But we really need to have hundreds, if not thousands, of applications that work in everything. And we need the teachers and local IT staff and local instructional designers need to be able to innovate. And Canvas has this thing called EduX, which is really cool. It's really kind of lame at the same time. It's not a very great tool, but it absolutely fits in people's minds as the way the future should be. So the future should look like this, but be better than what they've actually built at EduX. And the standards are coming. And there's my North Church in the upper right-hand corner. The standards are coming, but it's not sure we're ready for them, right? LTI 1 is like the savior of learning management system marketplace. It was 3 pages of specification and about 100 lines of hello world code, and everybody used it, and it was great. But LTI 2 is many specs, many interactions. It's going to be much harder to build. And if you add Caliper and the CASA App Store API and all these other standards, which are great, and they're going to enable this unbundling, but we're going to have to work a little harder at building the software to support these standards. Sakai can still lead, but I'm not so worried about Sakai's and the Canvases and Desired Learners of the world. They can throw 3 developers at something for a year and they can get something. I'm more worried about the tool developers to make use of this. And so if you take a look at the current sort of Canvas App Store, it's really the App Store is also the hosting environment. So you really are sharing your data when you use the EduApps thing. You're sharing your data in their server. So you're not really installing anything. But the right architecture for this is a hosting environment where instead of giving the data to one hosting provider, you can run a hosting container on your campus, and then you can install the software on your campus, run the software on your campus, store the data on your campus, but you still get a hold of software from somebody else. So you don't have to write all the software. You can write your own widgets. You can use someone else's widgets. It's kind of like an app store. When you install an app on your phone, you're not using a cloud app that's on their servers. The app runs on your phone. So there's got to be this installation step. And the current thing that Canvas does is really not that. But we need to move toward this. And my little project called Sugi, that you see the name right there, is there. And then what I really want to say is that maybe on a campus you'll have a place where instructional designers can play. There'll be a big production system that runs the really important stuff. And there's another place that instructional designers can play and upgrade like 20 times a day, or IT staff can play. So I want these hosting containers to make it so that we don't innovate and screw around with the top stuff as much anymore. Because we can't even change Coursera. We can't really change Canvas. We can change Sakai, but it takes a year to get to a release. I want to be able to change my tools on a daily basis or maybe a quarterly basis. And so this is a thing where the clever, pedagogically rich tools that we're going to have using LTI and all these other standards need to not be in the LMS. They need to be somewhere else. And this is the simple picture. Before we're done, in the next 3 to 5 years, we're going to see things like the LMS is going to be subsumed in some ways by epub readers, because epub readers are learning how to hold on to course, user, and other contextual data and launch things from the book. So you'll be able to stick quizzes in the book, you'll be able to stick other assessments, pedagogically rich assessments, and they'll all be in the book. And these things have to find each other and then send data back to each other. And like, did you take the quiz? But the quiz isn't even in the learning management system. The quiz wasn't even launched from the learning management system. The learning management system launched a book, and the book took the quiz. Or maybe the student used the book, took the quiz, and then they launched later from the learning management system, and the quiz results just go back to the LMS. So it's going to get more complex, but it's going to be more awesome by the time it's all said and done. And it's going to make the architecture of LMSs very different. Inside Apereo, we don't have anything delivered yet, but we've already got a model and mentality, and have for 2 years, that this is not about an LMS. This is not about Sakai and making Sakai more and more gigantic. This is about stabilizing Sakai, making what it does, make it do well what it does, right? So we have projects like Karuta. There's a learning analytics effort that's going on. These are likely to be independent projects. They're not sub-projects of Sakai. And then I've got my little external tool hosting environment, Tsugi. But these are going to be cross-LMS projects. Now the weird thing is, these are going to work as well in Canvas or Desire to Learn or Blackboard as they are in Sakai. And if we don't do that, we're doing it wrong, right? We are here to make teaching and learning better. We come together to innovate and make the marketplace better. So I have this crazy notion. We're not the Sakai Foundation anymore. We are the Sakai Project within the Apereo Foundation. Apereo is not just about Sakai. Apereo is about higher education, academic mission. I don't understand why Blackboard, Canvas, and Desire to Learn and Coursera don't join Apereo to work on a shared portfolio project or a shared analytics project. So my dream ultimately is that all these folks will be part of Apereo. Sakai will continue to be part of Apereo, but these other cross-LMS things could easily become Apereo projects. And so we see, in my future, I see Apereo as becoming the source of new, emergent, innovative, open source solutions to academics' problems, and IMS is the source of the standards around which they work. And so I see these two organizations getting closer and closer together, and maybe, just maybe, I will then have like a tattoo where it really is all the members of the Apereo Foundation, not just all the people who complied with IMS LTI, which is what that tattoo currently is everybody that complies with LTI. So I think we need to keep a very open mind for the future. I think that the future of Sakai itself is extremely strong and going to be stronger. I think we will find that the market is not going to stop changing, and it is good to have a piece of software that you own, right? You own it. The people on this phone call own Sakai. It's never going to be sold. There's nobody that can own it. No one can corner the market on Sakai. Pearson doesn't see us as so valuable that they're going to pay for us, yada, yada, yada. So you can keep your LMS. We will innovate gently over the next 3 to 4 years, that LMS. But I think more importantly, we're going to start seeing more and more exciting things happening in the scope of Apereo and in the LMS that lead us toward greatly improving pedagogy. So thank you for your time. I think we have about 20 minutes for questions, and I'm looking forward to hearing your questions. Wilma, do you want to take it back?
Sure. I'll read off the questions in the order they came in. So our first question is, will the lessons tool remain the main resource for branched learning?
Yeah, I think it will, and I think we're going to double down in our investment in lessons. Josh is leading that. I think that I would be curious what the questioner is really asking, because are there examples of many different types of branched learning? Perhaps people are talking about stuff that's informed or dynamic content switching that allows for whole competency-based networks to be built. I wish I could get a clarifying question in on that. I could imagine, let me guess what the questioner is asking beyond lessons. I think lessons is awesome. I see no reason to build, I mean, I think lessons matches the functionality that's in virtually every LMS on the planet right now, and I'm proud of that. But if we were going to build something that was like a dynamically moving, competency-based thingy, kind of like, say, Khan Academy, for example, I would honestly build that outside the LMS. I really would. I'd build that outside the LMS. I would not build that inside the LMS. I think the specs for the LMS are at this point pretty much set in stone.
Okay.
And wouldn't it be nice if, like, D2L and Canvas and Sakai and whatever you do for your dynamic, you know, competency-based learning would work in all those? Why wouldn't you want to do that?
Good. Second question was, any relationship with Blackboard anymore as an employee?
Well, I don't work at Blackboard. I left Blackboard to I left Blackboard and then I left Blackboard 1 week and the next week I started with Longsight. And so no, I mean, I still have lots and lots of friends at Blackboard, and I talk to them regularly. I'm going to miss my first Blackboard BB World in a couple of years, and you know, they're all like, how come you're not coming? I'm like, well, I don't have any reason to go to BB World. So no, I have no remaining involvement with Blackboard other than many good friends, both at Blackboard and Moodle Rooms.
Okay. How about as Google becomes more LMS-y, do you see Sakai competing or connecting with Google?
Yeah, that is a great question, and I have already signed up for the beta of Google Classroom. I've not been accepted yet because I think it's interesting. And you notice I talk about Edmodo. I think that the biggest threat to Google, that Google Classroom currently, the biggest threat to the Google Class, the company to which that's the largest threat is really Edmodo. And I think that Google Classroom is going after the Edmodo space. If you've ever used Edmodo, it's pretty much an activity stream, documents, and a gradebook with plug-in widgets. I hope that Google Classroom does LTI. I sent through as many channels as I can the query. I think that it's got to be on their radar. I hope. I've not had any communication with them. From a Sakai perspective, I think there's no point in competing, right? I don't think we would go and say, oh, every feature that Google Classroom has, we're going to have to match, because it's going to be difficult. I think they're going to do a pretty bad job of it at the very beginning, because it's just like, it's Google Docs. And if you look at it, it's just ripping off Edmodo completely. It's Google Docs and Edmodo, and an activity stream with a roster and a little URL way of enrollment, and Google is going to think that's fine. They're not going to want to take your LDAP feed or whatever. They're going to think it's fine because that's worked for Edmodo, and Edmodo has 35 million people. So I think we're going to find that my dream would be that Google Classroom would use LTI, and then we could build innovative tools that we use both inside Sakai and Coursera and Google Classroom. I think a Google Classroom is not that different than Coursera, that there will be classes that campuses run in their enterprise LMS, and there'll be classes that they run in Google Classroom. And I just wish that we could use some of the same capabilities both places.
I know you've touched on this a little bit already, but in case you want to add anything, who do you see as Sakai's biggest competitors?
Yeah, I mean, who is Sakai's biggest competitors? I think that the strongest competitor in the marketplace is Canvas at this point, but I don't necessarily like using the word competitor. I see that the fact that Canvas is strong and investing heavily in things like standards and moving things forward, I think that Canvas is also our greatest ally at this point, and I'd like to, I mean, there is competition, but there's also, it's not just pure. It's not just pure anti. I like talking to developers that I know from Canvas, and I think they're smart people, and I'm happy to compete with them in the field of sport, and I'm happy to see and try to win the sporting contests. And I'm happy to be competing with them, but I don't think it is a sort of like win. It's not always win-lose. And so I see a significant win-win between Sakai. And frankly, you could ask me this question every 3 years, just substituting Canvas for some other. How do I feel about Angel? I would say, Angel is great. They're emerging. Their market share is going up. They're penetrating K-12. But I don't see Angel as a threat because I want to work with Angel because interoperability is what's most important to me. What do you think about WebCT? Oh, I think WebCT is great. They're really pushing hard. They're really innovating, and they want to work on standards, and I want to work with them in standards. Oh, what do you think about Moodle Rooms? Oh, Moodle Rooms is great, right? They're innovating. I love how their market share is growing. You know, yada, yada. Oh, they're going into K-12, and I see them not as necessary competition, but somebody I want to work with because they want to innovate. And I think 3 years from now, they'll be like, blank. I love blank. They're doing great. They're doing great stuff. And yes, we compete with them, and yes, we have to fight with them, and we have to match blank. But I really like working with them because they're smart people, and they're advancing the market. Angel's not advancing the market. Moodle Rooms is not advancing the market, and WebCT is not advancing the market. None of those are advancing the market. Sakai still is advancing the market. Canvas is advancing the market. Our goal is to make teaching and learning better. So yeah, it's no fun to lose to them in an RFQ, but they're not exactly the enemy. That helps.
Why do you think that there isn't more talk about Sakai in the marketplace?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I think that we don't have a product at this point that is capable of displacing, right? We can't walk into a Blackboard school and kick them out. Just walk in, face them down, and beat them. And that's because we've never been set up to build a product that is face-to-face competing and win at all costs. And the reason we're not being buzzed in the marketplace is because the marketplace only cares about growth. It doesn't care about impact and doesn't care about customer happiness, right? It doesn't say, wow, there's 300 schools and yeah, it's got four-wheel drive and it gets through the snow really neat, but it's, you know, it's not flashy and it's not convertible. So yeah, we're not a convertible, we're not flashy, but you know, we carry a lot of people and we do that very effectively. And so the market really doesn't care about anything other than, you know, what's most recent, and just keeping, you know, millions of students happy every day and keeping IT people happy every day. Nobody cares. And so, you know, Chronicle doesn't care about that. Inside Higher Education doesn't care about that. And you know what? They're just looking for clickbait anyways. So whatever. I mean, that's the nature of the media. We're doing a great job, and we're not the one with the bullet rising, but every one of those ones that rise end up burning themselves out, and we're still here. So yeah, it's frustrating, but just working hard and doing the good work gets you very little attention.
Do you see smaller colleges and universities becoming more of a presence in the Sakai community?
I actually do. I think that's a great question, and thank you to whoever gave me that question, because I've been thinking about this a lot myself lately. I think that we're going to find that really large universities, like Michigan, for example, are going to have lots of products in our mix. We're not going to just have one LMS. We're not going to just have the LMS that is the enterprise LMS. We can afford to have 3 LMSs and 2 file sharing services and a partridge in a pear tree. And the faculty will complain and say, don't take that away. And we're like, okay, we'll write a $200,000 check each year to keep that thing for a little while for you folks. So I think we're going to find this really interesting, and standards are part of this situation where the larger and more wealthy schools may run Sakai for a very long time, but they might not make Sakai their only system for a very long time. But a smaller school can't afford that. A smaller school can't afford to train 10 different systems. Sakai collapses 3 or 4 systems that a school might have to, if they just had a straight up LMS like Blackboard or Canvas, then they'd have to have another thing to do committees with. And then you go like, oh crap, what are we doing with that? Oh, okay, maybe we'll use Google Docs or whatever. So I think that medium schools need to have a simpler IT infrastructure and fewer things to train people on. And I think that larger schools are going to afford to, well, I mean, let me just go back to that picture. I don't know if you can see this picture, right? I mean, this picture right here is kind of like the structure that Michigan is going to be. And I'm going to use all those things, right? And Michigan can afford to run them all. It doesn't matter. We're big enough. Medium schools aren't necessarily going to be able to say, yeah, let's take some of that too. So I think that the fact that Sakai solves a bigger problem than the rest of the LMSs is a good reason why medium-sized and smaller schools will like it.
Okay, how is the development into M-learning proceeding? And I assume they mean mobile.
That is a great question. Yeah, so mobile, mobile's a great topic. And sometimes if you're late to a party, you can make smarter decisions. Moodle, for example, has had like a couple of different mobile strategies that have gone all the way to sort of production and deployment, and then they switch their mobile strategy, and then they switch their mobile strategy again. And we haven't really had a big mobile strategy in Sakai, and so we've missed a few potential choices where we would have made bad mistakes. And I think, and I'm hopeful, and I put on the Sakai 11 roadmap to have a Sakai mobile application. And but that mobile application is probably not going to be exactly the same as what we think of as maybe a Canvas mobile application or an E2R mobile application. And when you build a responsive website that adapts to mobile and make it so your tools really work effectively in mobile, you really don't have to replicate all functionality of your LMS in mobile. But what you have to do is mobile becomes important for things like notifications and short activities, right? And so what I think we're going to end up with by this time next year is a Sakai mobile application that effectively replicates the dashboard functionality, which should be there in Sakai 11 as well, which is notifications and effectively like a launching pad. Like it's going to be the first screen that you see. It's the announcements that happen, the resources that get uploaded, and a little thing that says there are 4 things that happen. Little 4 shows up on your phone, and you go to your app and you see the 4 things and you click on it. Now that might then go to a responsive web page at that point. And I don't think we need to build a mobile application. And so think about that for a minute. So it means that you can build as long as you back it with a responsive website, right? You can build a surprisingly thin mobile application that's more about notifications, not about replicating functionality, but about notifications. So you and some mobile apps are thick. They're trying to build a threaded discussion, and they're trying to build a resources tool. And I'm like, don't do it. Just build a responsive website behind them. But then you start thinking, well, if we could come up with a standard, say at IMS, for notifications, maybe we could build a mobile application that would work across learning management systems and unbundle the mobile application so that it's not proprietary. And if it's really about notifications, and if everybody in the marketplace follows our lead and moves to a responsive web interface, then they can make themselves a thinner mobile app. And then you could imagine that that thin mobile app would be shareable. And if we could build a standard, then who knows? And then the next thought is, well, what if we just put that on your television? What if your mobile learning app was just a thing on your television? And you have little notes, and you hit a button, and it goes into a web browser. It's a responsive website, yada, yada. So that's a bit sort of vague and a bit airy-fairy and a bit like big vision. So I think to bring it back to earth, I think that we're going to, by this time next year, have a simple notification app that you will find surprisingly effective, that will be surprisingly simple.
Okay, here's a juicy question. Curious to hear your reactions to the Unison Initiative and how that might affect the future of Sakai.
Yeah, that's a great question. Of course, Unison is founded by University of Michigan and Indiana University, and they recently did a press event where they clarified some things. I think some of the rumors of Unison before the announcement got way ahead of the reality of Unison. I think we need to give Unison some time to define what it is. I think it's somewhat undefined at this point. I hope it's something other than schools who are buying Canvas. I think it will be more than that, but I also think that it's still under definition. I'm not part of the Unison effort at the University of Michigan, so I don't even know of which I speak. So Indiana University clearly is moving firmly to Canvas, and that's fine. Michigan is piloting Canvas. I think Unison will, unless they change some direction, looks like Unison is mostly just going to be a collective way to contemplate the purchase of commercial products rather than a build. So in that respect, it doesn't compete at all. I think that it is great. The more that people find a reason to invest in teaching and learning on their campuses, the happier that I am. And I believe that, or I'm looking forward in ways to Canvas being on my campus. I'm looking forward to using Canvas myself. I'm at a very wealthy campus and we can afford multiple LMSs. And I'm going to look at that as an opportunity to learn more about Canvas and potentially work with Canvas to move the market forward. And so I think that Unison ultimately will be one more force in moving the market forward, and they will have demands, and they will have money to help move those demands forward. And so I think it's a net positive. I don't think it competes really at this point with Sakai at all, and I don't think it harms Sakai nor helps Sakai. Sakai, Indiana, and Michigan, along with Stanford, Cambridge, and others, deserve a tremendous round of applause and thanks for getting Sakai started in the time when Sakai didn't exist, but Sakai does exist now. Does not depend as much on Unison as it did, and so the fact that those schools a decade later want to experiment with other things, and I think that's great. It would be counter to our community values to suggest that that's wrong. So I have to think that that's right, and I'm looking forward to what they do over the next year.
What do you think about a Sakai Marketplace where institutions with money and people with ideas can get together with people who are able to do the development work? Something like a Kickstarter for Sakai to bring together ideas, funding, and developers.
Yeah, I think that's a super great idea, and I'm not sure there's been a single person in the Sakai community that hasn't had that idea, because it's such a good idea. It just has to take the right form, and I don't know what form it should be, but it'd be neat if you could have a white-labeled Kickstarter or something like that. But I think that is a great model, and I think it's informally how a lot of stuff is being done. Unfortunately, it takes phone calls to gather 3 or 4 schools that get a bit of money together and then find themselves a commercial affiliate and contract with that commercial affiliate to get a feature added to Sakai. I mean, we're working that way already. It would be great if we could formalize that, but I don't exactly know the way forward, and I would love to hear any suggestions people might have about how we could do that.
We've got a couple more minutes to the end of the hour, but I do still have several questions here. So I understand if people need to leave, feel free. We will be recording the session and sending it out afterward. But Chuck, if you can stick around for another 5 or 10 minutes, maybe we can get through the rest of the questions.
Happy to do so.
Okay, great. We do have a question about archiving. Someone wants to know if there will finally be a process to archive courses with the ability to restore them in their entirety. Is that on the roadmap?
Well, I mean, we sort of do have the archive. I'm going to guess that there's probably problems with that. To me, that's a nice to have, and it will depend. We're talking about in 11 potentially taking the common cartridge export out of lessons and making it a Sakai-wide thing that would make archiving a more natural process and a more user-focused process that users could trigger rather than a process that system administrators have to trigger. That has been sort of a weakness of ours for a long time. And part of it is because it just hasn't been the critical thing. I think that if there is a set of schools that are at the point where that's critical to them, I think that we should get together. And I mean, I know of folks that have really improved it. The Etudes folks have done a really good job at that, but it's a forked version of Sakai, so we really can't use that code, and it's not open source anymore. But I know it's a fixable problem, but it's not trivially fixable. So that would be something to kickstart and get some funds raised for if that was what we needed. And that could easily be a Sakai 12 kind of thing. I mean, I think each of these releases have sort of a theme to them, right? And I think 11 is like surprise and delight and user delight, and I think 12, who knows what it could be, that kind of like back office grooviness.
Will Sakai 10 include the ability to incorporate ensemble video and or media core for video content?
I don't really understand the question.
Yeah. If the author of that question could maybe, if you're still here, if you could put in a little clarification there, yeah. I'll check and see if, will there be any upgrades? Oh wait, no, that's a different one. Okay, well we'll go on to the next one. If you want to type in a clarification, that would be great. Can you explain what the addition of the Tin Can API will mean for us with the new release?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the Tin Can API in Sakai, and there's one in Moodle as well, effectively you can configure Sakai and point it at a Tin Can endpoint, and Sakai will start dumping event data to that endpoint. And, you know, learning record store is one of the forms of the endpoint, and it's there. You turn it on, and data starts dumping. It's really quite simple. The question really is what's on the other end, what receives the XAPI. And there is learning record stores out there. There's even free learning record stores out there. And you know that's the question. So Sakai's ready, and that's kind of the boring part. You know, you tell it where to send the XAPI data, and it gets sent, and that's neat. The bigger question becomes when you look a bit at the XAPI data. It really kind of is it's a very simple spec, and it does things like reduces identity to email address, and you know, if you're taking XAPI data from multiple sources, things like what resource you're talking about can be troublesome. And so at a higher level, and this is more of a critique of XAPI than it is of Sakai's implementation of XAPI, because Sakai did as good a job as you can do. I think we should think that XAPI is not likely to create a nirvana of analytics tools that are suitable for teachers and or students to use. It really is more a way to capture the data that analytics professionals, like we have folks at the University of Michigan that have access to tons of data across Sakai and Coursera, and they do really cool analysis on that stuff, right? But they've never made tools that me as a teacher, I as a teacher get to use. And so I think XAPI is better than not getting any data out of these systems, but it doesn't get data that is suitable to build a great deal of teacher-facing tools because it loses things like the precise identity of individuals by using email instead of like primary key of the user in an LMS or which LMS this is coming from. And that's where the caliper standard is sort of beyond XAPI. Caliper standard is a much richer format, and it will capture things like the primary key of the user in the Sakai LMS on campus X, which means then you can start building learning record stores that you can know that this particular data came from that course, this primary key in that LMS. So if you do an LTI launch to the learning record store, the record store can connect up the exact data from the exact course for that teacher and not mistakenly show you data from somebody else just because some email got mapped a little different way. And so it turns out if you're a professional doing research in this area, you're allowed to look at all the data across all the classes. But if you're just a teacher, you're not allowed to look at the data outside your class. And so Caliper gives us the kind of precision in that event data that is needed to start building really good end-user analytics tools. Because you can't lose identity and context the way you're going to lose it in XAPI. But XAPI is still great. It just doesn't yet get us to the point where there's going to be like tons and tons of really awesome analytics tools outside the LMS. And that's why you kind of say XAPI and caliper in the same sentence. XAPI is kind of like the version, it's like basic caliper. And so that's XAPI. I mean, for those people who are going to do data analysis, where it's professional people, not the teachers looking at the data, XAPI is a great thing.
Okay, how can we get the skills needed in the community to significantly improve the user delight of Sakai? For example, do we need a UX, UI community of interest?
Absolutely. I think we do have the skills. I think that the interest in the community in the Morpheus work is absolutely at the highest level. I think that the way we're going to do it is we're going to get that work started soon, this summer even, and show it to people. And then our community will do what our community does, and that means that we will flow to it, and we will bring ideas to it, and we'll improve it. I mean, the Sakai Neo portal 2.9 was built the exact same way. We just got something in there, and then worked on it. The interesting thing is that the easy part of that surprise and delight is, as it always has been, is the outer part, and that is the portal itself. That if we change it one place, and it changes on every click at that point. The harder part is to change the tools to make them equally delightful. But we're at the point now where we've really matured as a community, and I think we can spread the work out in ways that we've never been able to spread the work out. People can decide, you know what, I'm going to fix this. And even if you weren't the school that originally wrote it in the first place, I think that the modifications will be welcomed in those areas in ways that they haven't been historically in the early days, where, you know, the owner of this little corner was X and the owner of that little corner was Y. And we sort of like broke it all up, and everybody owned their little corner and kind of defended it. There's not a lot less of that now. There's a lot more of we own it all collectively, rather than you know, each little piece is owned by somebody and then defended by somebody. And so I think we will see that once we build a nice, well-designed portal, which we'll iterate and improve, then we'll start iterating on the tools, and people are like, oh, that's kind of yucky, so we got to fix it. Let's fix it, and then we'll fix it together. And the commercial affiliates, you know, Sahi and Unicon and Longsight, they want this delight too, and so if there's a little bit of like cleanup that needs to be done, I think we can expect them to step up and, you know, do the cleanup, or take a patch and redo the patch if it sort of is only partially done. But I think we're going to touch a lot of the product to get it. It won't be just delight in the outer 10% of each screen. It'll be user delight all the way down to every tool. And I think that's an exciting thing, because it's really something we've never done before. 2.9 really changed the outer 10% of each screen, but I think 10 is going to change the entire screen and clean it up.
Let's see here. We've got quite a few more questions. I don't know if we're going to have time to get to all of them, because I do want to be respectful of everyone's time. We'll just ask a couple more, and then I think we'll wrap up. So here's one. The idea of having a platform LMS be more agnostic, like much devices today and user with apps, is innovative. It further affirms the idea of differentiated instruction and learning. What's a way that we can help further develop through our support behind this crazy future?
Yeah, the answer is, you know, stay tuned. I don't want to make the mistake that we made in 2003, 2004 of announcing success prematurely. I want these hosting environments and this crazy architecture to be well documented before we sort of pop it out. It is my hope that by June of next year at the Apereo conference, we are giving boot camps on how to build these unbundled tools, and that we have, I even have a dream of building a MOOC, and the MOOC is how to write a tool, how to write a learning tool, right? So you take your random instructional designer or IT staff at school X, and they go take a 3-week MOOC class, and they learn how to build one of these things with this infrastructure I want to build, and maybe there's a little book or documentation, and then like 3 weeks later they're writing stuff, you know, and so I understand that we've got to make this easy. We have to document it well, and it has to give really fast feedback. I mean, writing a Sakai tool is just too painful. I'm glad when we have written the last one, because they're just so hard, and training people to write Sakai tools is so hard. But training people to write these new interoperable tools, I want that to be easy. I mean, the world's changed in 10 years. We didn't have Bootstrap and we didn't have jQuery. So there's a lot of things that are a lot easier, so we don't have to make the same mistakes. For those of you who saw my talk at Perio Conference, of all the mistakes we made in the last 10 years. And so I want to build something that is, you know, anybody at any of the 300 Sakai schools can, within a couple of weeks, even being a basic mid-level programmer, should be able to write a Sakai/Canvas/Coursera tool. And so I know that I've got to work hard on that and make it well documented. Here's a little trick, though. I also am teaching a class at the University of Michigan on PHP and MySQL that helps me subsidize the development of those materials.
Okay, we are a little over 10 minutes after, so I'm going to go ahead and wrap up. If we didn't get to your question, I apologize, but we can follow up via email afterward. And Chuck, do you have any wrap-up remarks that you'd like to say to kind of close up the session?
No, I sure wish I could have saw the look on people's faces while I was talking, but we'll have to do this in person sometime.
Well, thank you everyone for attending, and thank you so much, Chuck, for sharing your insights with us. It was a really interesting session, and I really enjoyed it. So thank you, everyone.
Thanks.